You solve today's problem by creating a much bigger problem tomorrow. Even though everyone has twice as much money, they can still only afford one loaf of bread. Because politicians think short-term, the central bank is supposed to be independent. People would get paid twice a day. They used wheelbarrows full of cash to buy groceries. And Mugabe's solution? Print more money. That people literally threw it on the streets is just creating an illusion. In July 1946, prices in Hungary doubled every 15 hours. Not every day, not every week, every 15 hours. A coffee that cost you 100 pengő at breakfast would cost 200 by dinner and 400 by the time you woke up. By the time it ended, the government printed a banknote worth 100 quintillion pengő. That's a 1 with 20 zeros after it. And you know what it could buy? Absolutely nothing.
Wait, how is that even possible? How does money just become worthless?
That, Sam, is exactly what happens when governments think they can solve their problems by simply printing more money. And before you think this is ancient history, the same thing happened in Zimbabwe in 2008, in Venezuela starting in 2016, and the temptation still exists today. So let's talk about why we can't just print more money. Before we dive into the disasters, we need to understand something fundamental. Think of money like a pizza. You've got a family of 4, and you order one large pizza with 8 slices. Everyone gets 2 slices. Fair enough, right?
Sure, that makes sense.
Now, what if I told you that instead of cutting the pizza into 8 slices, I'm going to cut it into 16 slices? Does anyone get more pizza?
No, it's still the same amount of pizza, just smaller pieces.
Exactly. That's precisely what happens when a government prints more money. The economy is the pizza. The actual goods and services, the bread, the cars, the houses, the medical care, that's the pizza. Money is just the slices. When you print more money without creating more goods and services, you're not making anyone richer. You're just cutting the same pizza into smaller and smaller pieces. But wait, if that's so obvious, why would any government ever do it? Because, Jack, when you're desperate and you need money right now, printing it is the easiest solution. It's like taking out a payday loan. You solve today's problem by creating a much bigger problem tomorrow. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine a small village with 5 people: Bob, John, Alex, Jack, and Tony. There's one bakery that makes 5 loaves of bread every day. Each person has $5, and each loaf costs $5. Simple. Everyone can buy one loaf.
So the supply matches the demand.
Perfectly. Now, let's say the village leader decides everyone is too poor. He prints $5 more and gives each person an extra $5. Now everyone has $10 instead of 5. But here's the thing. The bakery still only makes 5 loaves of bread. So people would want to buy more bread since they have more money. Right. Each person now wants to buy 2 loaves, but there are still only 5 loaves. So what does the baker do? He sees people lining up with cash in their hands, competing for his bread. What would you do if you were the baker?
Raise the price?
Exactly. The baker raises the price to $10 per loaf. And now, even though everyone has twice as much money, they can still only afford one loaf of bread. That's inflation in its purest form. More money chasing the same amount of goods. But couldn't the baker just make more bread? He could try, but the baker needs flour, and the farmer who grows the wheat sees all this extra money floating around too. The farmer raises his prices. Then the baker has to raise his prices even more. It's a ripple effect. The money supply increased, but the actual productive capacity of the economy didn't. This is the fundamental law that every government that has tried to print its way out of problems has learned the hard way.
Uncle Mike, I have a basic question. What even is money? Like, why does this piece of paper have any value at all?
That's not a basic question, Sam. That's the fundamental question. Here's the truth that surprises most people. Money has absolutely no intrinsic value. 0. If you were stranded on a desert island with $1 million in cash, you know what that cash would be good for? Starting a fire. Maybe toilet paper if you're desperate. So money only works because we all agree it works? There's a concept called the Tinkerbell effect. Like the fairy from Peter Pan, who only exists because children believe in her. Money only has value because we collectively believe it has value. The moment that belief breaks down, the money becomes worthless. And that's what happens during hyperinflation. People stop believing.
So how did we get from trading actual stuff like cows and grain to pieces of paper?
Throughout history, we've had three types of money. First was commodity money. You traded things that had actual value. Salt, spices, gold, silver. If someone didn't want your gold, well, gold is still gold. It's beautiful, it's rare, it doesn't rust. Then came representative money. You deposit your gold at a bank, and they'd give you a piece of paper saying you own that gold. That paper represented actual value sitting in a vault. And now? Now we have fiat money. In 1971, President Nixon ended the gold standard. He said the US dollar would no longer be backed by gold. Today, your money is backed by nothing but the government's promise that it has value. The word fiat comes from Latin, meaning let it be done. The government essentially says, let this be money, and we all go along with it. As long as we trust the government.
So if the government can just declare money into existence, why don't they?
Here's where it gets interesting. In most countries, the government actually cannot just print money directly. There's a separation of powers. In the United States, you have three entities involved. The government can approve spending for things like stimulus checks. The Treasury Department raises money by selling bonds. And the Federal Reserve, the central bank, controls the actual money supply. Why separate them? Why not let the government just print what it needs? Because politicians think short-term. They want to get re-elected. If the president could print money whenever he wanted, every election year we'd have free money raining from the sky and hyperinflation by Christmas. The central bank is supposed to be independent, making decisions based on economics, not politics.
So when people say the government is printing money,
it's a simplification. What actually happens is more like this. The Treasury says we need money for stimulus. They issue bonds, basically IO us. Investors, countries, pension funds, they buy these bonds. Sometimes the Federal Reserve buys them too. When the Fed buys Treasury bonds, it creates new money electronically. No printing press goes brrr. It's just numbers in a computer. But the effect is the same. More money enters the system. That sounds like printing with extra steps. It is. But those extra steps create accountability, transparency, and limits. At least in theory. When those checks and balances fail, that's when you get disaster. Now let's look at three countries that learned these lessons the hard way. After World War I, Germany was devastated. The Treaty of Versailles demanded massive reparations. The country was broke, the infrastructure was destroyed, and they owed money they didn't have. So the Weimar Republic started printing.
how bad did it get?
In January 1923, a loaf of bread cost 250 marks. By November 1923, that same loaf cost 200 billion marks. Prices doubled every few hours. People would get paid twice a day and run to spend the money before it became worthless. They used wheelbarrows full of cash to buy groceries. Some people burned money for heat because it was cheaper than buying firewood. That's insane. What happened to people's savings? Completely wiped out. Someone who had saved their whole life for retirement suddenly found their life savings couldn't buy a cup of coffee. The middle class was destroyed. And that destruction created the anger and desperation that led to the rise of extremism. History teaches us that economic chaos breeds political chaos. Zimbabwe's story is more recent and just as dramatic. In the early 2000s, President Robert Mugabe implemented land reforms that redistributed farmland. Many experienced farmers left. Agricultural production collapsed. The economy spiraled. And Mugabe's solution? Print more money.
But he must have known that wouldn't work.
Desperate governments don't think long-term. By 2008, Zimbabwe's inflation rate peaked at 89.7 sextillion%. That's 89.7 followed by 20 zeros. Prices doubled every 24 hours. The government printed $100 trillion bills that couldn't buy a loaf of bread. People needed stacks of cash just to buy eggs. How did it end? The Zimbabwean dollar was abandoned entirely. To this day, Zimbabwe doesn't have its own national currency. People use US dollars, South African rand, and euros. The country essentially admitted its money was worthless and gave up. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, more than Saudi Arabia. In the early 2000s, when oil prices were high, Venezuela was wealthy. But instead of diversifying the economy, the socialist government spent freely on subsidies and social programs, funded almost entirely by oil revenue.
What happened when oil prices dropped?
After 2008, oil prices crashed. Venezuela's income plummeted, but the government couldn't cut the subsidies without angering the people. So, they printed money to keep the subsidies going. Hyperinflation hit. The Venezuelan bolivar became so worthless that people literally threw it on the streets. As of 2024, cumulative inflation since 2016 has exceeded 100,000%. The average Venezuelan lost over 70% of their body weight due to food shortages. So, what's stopping that from happening to us? That's the right question, Jack. The United States has printed enormous amounts of money recently. During COVID-19 in 2020, the Federal Reserve created over $3 trillion in just a few months. The U.S. national debt is now over $34 trillion. So why haven't we become Zimbabwe?
Yeah, I've heard people say we're printing too much. Are we in danger?
Here's the nuance that the doomsayers miss. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. Countries around the world hold dollars. Oil is traded in dollars. When there's a crisis, people actually want more dollars, not fewer. That gives America a unique privilege to create money without immediate collapse. But we still got inflation after COVID. Prices went up everywhere. Absolutely. US inflation hit 9.1% in June 2022, the highest in 40 years. That wasn't hyperinflation, but it was painful. Groceries, gas, housing, everything got more expensive. And it was a direct consequence of flooding the economy with money during the pandemic while supply chains were broken.
So even we're not immune.
No one is immune. The difference is degree and trust. Economists generally agree that about 2% inflation per year is healthy. It encourages spending and investment. But once inflation gets out of control, it's like a fire. A controlled campfire keeps you warm. An uncontrolled wildfire destroys everything. Can you actually control it once it starts? That's what central banks try to do. The Federal Reserve raises interest rates to cool down inflation. Higher interest rates mean borrowing is more expensive, people spend less, and prices stabilize. But it's painful medicine. It can cause unemployment and recession. It's a delicate balance, and getting it wrong has consequences that last generations.
What about just printing money to pay off the national debt? Wouldn't that solve the problem?
That's what some countries have tried, and here's what happens. When you print money to pay debts, other countries notice. They see your inflation reports, your currency markets, your economic indicators, and they think, this country is paying us back with toy money. So they stop lending to you. They demand higher interest rates. Your currency loses value on international markets. And suddenly, your debt becomes even harder to pay because you owe it in currency that's worth less. Let me give you my rule of 3 for understanding money creation. Rule number 1, money is not wealth. Money is a measuring stick for wealth. Printing more measuring sticks doesn't make you taller. Real wealth comes from goods, services, productivity, and innovation. A country with factories, farms, educated workers, and infrastructure is wealthy. A country with printing presses is just creating an illusion.
So focusing on productivity matters more than focusing on money.
Rule number 2, there are no shortcuts. Every country that tried to print its way out of problems ended up worse. Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Hungary, Yugoslavia. The pattern is always the same. Short-term relief followed by catastrophic collapse. Building a strong economy takes time, investment, education, and good governance. There's no magic button. So, what's the right approach? Rule number 3. Sustainable growth requires balance. Governments should invest in education to create skilled workers, build infrastructure to enable commerce, support businesses to increase production, manage resources efficiently. When the supply of goods grows alongside the money supply, prices stay stable. That's how Japan and South Korea went from war-torn nations to economic powerhouses. They didn't print wealth, they built it.
So the simple answer to why can't we just print more money is,
The simple answer is this. If money grew on trees, it would be as valuable as leaves. At the end of the day, you can't eat money. You can't live in money. You can't wear money. Money is just a tool, a way to exchange real value. When governments forget that, when they try to create wealth out of thin air, they destroy the very thing that makes money work: trust. And once trust is gone, the paper becomes worthless. Here's what I want you to think about. We've seen what happens when countries print money irresponsibly. But we've also seen massive money creation during COVID. So my question for you is, do you think the United States is on a sustainable path, or are we headed for trouble? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one.
and if you want to understand more about how inflation really works in everyday life, we're diving deep into that topic in our next video.
If you learned something today, smash that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to understand money better. And remember, the best investment you can make is in understanding how the world really works. I'm Uncle Mike, and I'll see you in the next file.